The galaxy thought it was safe. Turns out, something had been watching from the shadows for decades, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By 25 ABY, the New Republic figured the hard times were over. The Empire was beaten, and Chief of State Borsk Failure ran a government that honestly believed peace was permanent. So what did they do? They cut back on military spending and let their guard down. Nobody was preparing for a fight because nobody thought another war was coming. They were wrong. Way out beyond the edge of known space, an entire species had been studying the galaxy like scientists examining bugs under a microscope. The Yuuzhan Vong came from another galaxy entirely, and they'd been sending scouts for years to figure out how to conquer this one. The scary part is that signs of the coming threat were everywhere if you knew where to look. A guy named Nom Anor had been working behind the scenes for over a decade. Back in 11 ABY, he'd even messed with the Imperial Remnant's leadership, stirring up chaos and making sure nobody could organize against what was coming. He was playing the long game, setting up dominoes so they'd all fall at the right time. Then there was Vergera, a Jedi who vanished on some mission years ago. People assumed she was gone for good. Later, everyone found out she'd actually run into the Yuuzhan Vong and been living among them. Her disappearance was proof the invaders had been scouting the galaxy way longer than anyone realized. In 25 ABY, Nom Anor kicked his plan into high gear. He showed up on a world called Ramamul, pretending to be some kind of religious leader. He got the locals all riled up against their neighbor planet Osarian, and before long, these two worlds were at each other's throats. The fighting threatened a major hyperspace route called the Corellian Run, which meant the New Republic had to pay attention. But that was exactly what Anor wanted. While everyone focused on this local conflict, he was doing something way worse behind the scenes. He infected Mara Jade Skywalker with a disease called Coom Spore. This stuff was nasty and potentially fatal, which meant one of the most powerful Jedi around was suddenly fighting for her life instead of watching for bigger threats. Meanwhile, out on the Outer Rim, a group of scientists called the X-Gal Society was doing exactly what their name suggested. They were looking for alien life beyond the galaxy. They set up a research station on a planet called Belkadan and started scanning deep space. One of those scientists was named Yomin Kar. He seemed like a regular researcher, but he was actually a Yuuzhan Vong spy who'd been planted there years earlier. When Kar's equipment picked up signals from an approaching Yuuzhan Vong ship, he made his move. He took out his fellow scientists at the Exgal 4 outpost, then released toxins that started poisoning Belkadan's entire ecosystem. The planet was being prepared as a staging ground for invasion, and nobody in the New Republic had any clue it was happening. Think about how calculated this was. While the galaxy argued over trade routes and political squabbles, the Yuuzhan Vong had agents in place, biological weapons ready to go, and fleets moving into position. They'd been studying weaknesses, mapping targets, and corrupting ecosystems. The New Republic kept assuming they'd see an invasion coming. They figured any major threat would announce itself with big, obvious moves. But the Yuuzhan Vong understood something important about warfare. The best way to win a fight is to make sure your enemy doesn't realize they're in one until it's too late. By the time 25 ABY rolled around, every piece was in place. Nom Anor had created chaos and weakened the Jedi. Yomin Kar had prepared a landing zone. Scout ships had mapped the galaxy's defenses and found them lacking. The New Republic military was underfunded and scattered. The stage was set for the most devastating war the galaxy had ever seen. An extragalactic invasion was about to begin, and the Republic that should have been ready was instead caught completely off guard, unprepared for the nightmare that was coming through their front door. The Yuuzhan Vong weren't just invading. They'd been laying groundwork for years, making sure when they finally struck, nothing would be able to stop them. And in 25 ABUI, they were finally ready to make their move. Now, with the background set, let's dive into what happened when the Yuuzhan Vong finally made their move. In 25 ABY, a massive living ship called a world ship dropped out of hyperspace and touched down on Helska 4, an icy planet at the edge of known space. The ship was commanded by Prefect Dagara, and it carried the advance force of the invasion, a group called the Pretorite Vong. These weren't regular soldiers with standard equipment. They brought something called a Yamosk, which was basically a living war computer. This creature could coordinate entire fleets telepathically, giving the Vong a huge tactical advantage over anyone who had to rely on regular communications. The official Yuuzhan Vong War had just started, and nobody even knew it yet. Jedi Master Keep Duron was the unlucky one who found them first. He was leading his fighter squadron, the 102 Avengers, on a patrol near Helska when they picked up strange readings. Kip took his pilots in to investigate. Bad call. The Yuuzhan Vong hit them with coral skippers, which are organic fighters that move like living things instead of machines. Most of Kip's squadron got wiped out in the ambush. His apprentice Miko Reglia was captured and put through terrible things by the Yamosk. A scientist named Danny Kui also got grabbed, and the invaders pumped her for information about the galaxy. But first contact was just the warm-up. The Yuuzhan Vong were about to announce themselves to the entire galaxy in the worst way possible. They picked a remote world called Cernpedal for their demonstration. Prefect Dagara used a tactic with a fancy name, Yogan's Core, but what it actually meant was simple and horrifying. The Vong planted a gravity-controlling creature called a Dovan Basal on the planet's surface. This thing started pulling Cernpedal's moon out of orbit. Han Solo and Chewbacca were on Cernpedal when it happened, helping evacuate civilians as the moon Dobido began its slow fall toward the surface. They loaded up the Millennium Falcon with as many people as they could save, making trip after trip while chunks of the moon started breaking off and raining down. On their final run, Chewbacca was getting people onto the ship when debris came crashing down. He pushed Han's son Anakin and several others to safety, but there wasn't time for him to make it aboard. Anakin had to make the hardest choice of his life. With his father screaming at him to wait, the teenage pilot fired up the Falcon's engines and lifted off. Chewbacca, the legendary Wookiee who'd fought alongside Han for decades, disappeared as the moon collapsed onto the planet. Just like that, one of the galaxy's greatest heroes was gone. The news of Chewbacca's end hit everyone hard. This wasn't some faceless casualty in a distant battle. This was Chewie, the co-pilot of the Falcon, the friend who'd been there through everything. If the Yuuzhan Vong could take down someone like him, what chance did regular people have? Han and Anakin limped away from Cernpedal with the survivors, heading for a nearby planet called Dubrilion. Lando Calrissian ran operations there, and they figured it would be safe. Wrong again. The Pretorite Vong chased them down and launched an assault on Dubrilion. Waves of coral skippers came screaming in, trying to finish what they'd started at Cernpedal. But this time, the defenders were ready. Lando rallied New Republic forces and local defense ships, and they managed to drive off the attack. It was the galaxy's first actual victory against the invaders. Sure, it was small and it cost them plenty, but at least it proved the Yuuzhan Vong could be beaten. Back in the capital, Leia Organa Solo was fighting her own battle, trying to convince the government this was serious. Most senators didn't want to believe an extragalactic invasion was happening. They thought it was just some isolated incident that would blow over. Leia finally scraped together what she could get. One star destroyer named the Rejuvenator, a handful of support ships, and whatever forces would volunteer. She sent them to hit the Yuuzhan Vong base at Helska 4, hoping to cut off the invasion at its source. The Battle of Helska 4 was messy and desperate. Jacen Solo led a rescue team that managed to save Danny Kui from captivity, but Miko Reglia wasn't so lucky. The Rejuvenator got torn apart by Vong bioweapons, and the fleet took heavy losses. Then someone had a brilliant idea. Helska 4 was an ice planet with deep frozen oceans. The New Republic had brought ships with powerful shields that could be reconfigured as weapons. They turned these shield ships around and started bombarding the oceans, flash freezing the water so fast that ice built up at impossible speeds. The temperature dropped so quickly that the entire planet became unstable. Helska 4 started cracking apart like an egg. The ice kept building and expanding until the whole world just shattered into pieces. The Preterite Vong base, the Yamosk, and most of Dagara's forces got wiped out in one go. It was a major win, and it gave the galaxy hope that maybe they could handle this threat after all. But here's the thing about hope. Sometimes it blinds you to what's really coming. After Helska 4 blew apart, the Yuuzhan Vong went quiet. For about 2 months, nothing happened. No attacks, no sightings, no communications. The New Republic started to relax, thinking maybe they'd scared the invaders off, or at least convinced them to reconsider. They had no idea the Yuuzhan Vong were just regrouping. Out beyond the edge of the galaxy, massive fleets were assembling. The Preterite Vong had just been the advanced scouts, the tip of the spear. The real invasion force was on its way, and it was bigger than anything the galaxy had faced before. The calm before the storm had arrived, and when that storm finally hit, it would make everything that came before look like a warm-up exercise. When the Yuuzhan Vong came back in early 26 ABY, they came back angry. Supreme Commander Naschoka led an armada so massive it made the earlier attack look like a scouting party. These fleets didn't hit one target. They poured into the galaxy along multiple invasion routes, hitting dozens of systems at once. The New Republic completely fumbled the response. Admiral Cien Sov was running military operations, and he made a choice that doomed millions of people. He decided to protect the core worlds and major hyperspace lanes, leaving the outer rim to fend for itself. Bad strategy. Within the first year of the real invasion, the Yuuzhan Vong conquered nearly every system they would ever hold. They swept through the outer rim like a wildfire, pushing all the way to the mid-rim before anyone could mount a proper defense. Entire sectors fell in weeks. Planets that had stood for thousands of years got overrun in days. The speed was terrifying. The Republic kept thinking they could hold somewhere, draw a line the Vong couldn't cross, but every line got shattered. The Yuuzhan Vong circled back to finish what they'd started. They hit Dubrilion again, the planet Lando had managed to save earlier. This time, there was no lucky defense. Dubrilion and its colony Distrilion both fell, and the invaders kept pushing. Their next target was Dantooine, and this is where things got really bad. Dantooine had become a massive refugee camp. All those people Lando evacuated from Dubrilion before, they'd been relocated there, thinking they'd be safe. Thousands of families just trying to survive packed into temporary shelters across the planet's grasslands. The Yuuzhan Vong showed up with an army of Chazrach, which are basically reptilian soldiers bred for war. They also brought bioweapons designed to cause maximum suffering. The attack on those refugee camps was ruthless and efficient. Jason and Anakin Solo were on the ground when it happened. These two young Jedi found themselves facing wave after wave of Chazrach warriors. They took down a creature called a thrall herder, this massive beetle thing the Vong used to control their slave soldiers. Luke Skywalker joined the fight too, and together they managed to slow the assault enough for most refugees to escape. But Dantooine fell anyway. The Battle of Dantooine ended with the New Republic retreating and the planet in enemy hands. It was a pattern that would repeat itself over and over. The Jedi could win individual fights, but they couldn't stop the invasion. Still, the Jedi weren't giving up. While the military struggled to mount any real defense, Jedi Knights started running guerrilla operations behind enemy lines. Anakin Solo and Corran Horn led a raid on Garki, a planet the Yuuzhan Vong had already conquered. They weren't there to take it back. They were there to learn. The Jedi needed to understand these invaders, figure out their weaknesses, find some way to hurt them. And they found something huge. The Yuuzhan Vong warriors wore living armor called Vondoon Crab. This stuff was incredibly tough, could heal itself, and basically made its wearer almost impossible to hurt with conventional weapons. But on Garki, the Jedi discovered something weird. The armor started dying when it came into contact with pollen from Bafor trees. These trees were native to a planet called Ithor, and apparently their pollen was like poison to Vong biotech. The living armor would get smothered and stop working. Suddenly, the invincible warriors weren't so invincible anymore. This discovery gave the New Republic its first real hope. Maybe they couldn't match the Vong ship for ship, but if they could find ways to exploit biological weaknesses, they might have a chance. The Vong, of course, figured out what the Republic had learned. And when you've got an enemy who just discovered your armor's weakness, you go after the source of that weakness. That meant Ithor was about to become a major target. Before that happened, though, there was another confrontation brewing. A Yuuzhan Vong commander named Shadao Shai had a personal problem. Scientists on a world called Bimiel had dug up the remains of his ancestor during some archaeological work. For the Vong, who treated their ancestors with religious reverence, this was an unforgivable insult. Shadao Shai went to Bimiel personally to reclaim those remains. That's where he ran into Corran Horn. The two of them clashed on that Outer Rim world, and Corran ended up defeating two of Shai's warriors in combat over the relics. This wasn't some random skirmish. For Shadao Shai, losing those warriors to a Jedi was a personal failure and an insult to his honor. He became obsessed with getting revenge on Corran Horn specifically. The commander vowed he would face Horn again and settle the score. That grudge match was coming, and when it did, an entire planet would pay the price. The thing about this phase of the war was how helpless everyone felt. The Yuuzhan Vong just kept coming. Every victory the New Republic managed to scrape together was tiny compared to the losses. Planets were falling faster than anyone could count. Refugees were flooding into safer systems, which then became targets themselves. The military couldn't stop them. The politicians couldn't negotiate with them. The Yuuzhan Vong didn't want territory or resources in the traditional sense. They wanted to reshape the entire galaxy into something that matched their twisted religious views, and they had the ships and soldiers to do it. The Jedi were the only ones even slowing the invasion down. Small teams of Force users running raids, gathering intelligence, and occasionally pulling off impossible rescues. But there weren't enough Jedi to be everywhere at once. For every planet they helped save, 10 more fell. The first year of the real invasion was a nightmare. The New Republic went from thinking they'd scared the Vong off to watching huge chunks of the galaxy get conquered right in front of them. And the worst part was knowing that every system lost made the next one harder to defend. The Yuuzhan Vong had momentum, and nobody seemed able to stop it. The discovery of the Bafur tree weakness painted a target on one planet. Ithor, the lush sanctuary world where those trees grew naturally, was about to become ground zero for one of the war's most heartbreaking moments. In mid-26 ABY, the Yuuzhan Vong launched their assault on Ithor. War Master Tsavong La gave the order to Commander Shedao Shai, who had 2 reasons to be there. First, deny the New Republic access to the one weapon that could hurt Vong armor. Second, settle his personal grudge with Corran Horn and reclaim his ancestors' remains. The Battle of Ithor started with Vong warships pouring into the system. They hit the floating cities orbiting the planet and attacked the forests below. The Ithorians, a peaceful species who'd spent centuries protecting their world, watched helplessly as their home became a battlefield. The New Republic scrambled a defense force, but here's where something unexpected happened. The Imperial remnant showed up to help. Grand Admiral Gilad Pellaeon, who'd been leading what was left of the old empire, sent a task force to fight alongside Republic ships. This was huge. The Empire and the New Republic had been enemies for decades. They'd fought wars that shaped the galaxy, but now they were standing together against a common threat. It still wasn't enough. Even with Imperial Star Destroyers, Jedi Knights, and Ithorian defenders all working together, the Yuuzhan Vong had the advantage. Their bioweapons tore through defenses. Their coral skippers swarmed like angry insects. The floating city of Tafanda Bay took massive damage as the invaders pressed their attack. Ithor was burning, and everybody knew it was only a matter of time before the planet fell. That's when Corran Horn made an offer that changed everything. He called for an ancient form of combat, something the Yuuzhan Vong might actually respect. Single combat between champions to decide the fate of the world. Corran challenged Shedao Shai to a duel on Ithor's surface. The terms were simple and terrifying. If Corran won, the Yuuzhan Vong would leave Ithor alone. If he lost, the Vong could take the planet, and Shai would get his ancestors' bones back. Both sides agreed. They declared a week-long truce so civilians could evacuate and both armies could pull back. Then, when the time came, 2 warriors would fight, and their battle would determine millions of lives. The pressure on Corran must have been crushing. One Jedi Knight against a Yuuzhan Vong commander in his prime, with an entire world hanging in the balance. When the duel finally happened, it took place in Ithor's jungles. Trees that had stood for centuries watched as two figures clashed beneath their branches. Corran and Shadao Shai fought with everything they had. The Jedi's lightsaber against the commander's amphistaff, skill against rage, honor against vengeance. Corran won. He struck down Shadao Shai in combat, fulfilling his part of the bargain. For one brief moment, it looked like the impossible had happened. A Jedi had saved an entire planet through courage and skill. The Yuuzhan Vong were supposed to honor the agreement and leave. But Shadao Shai's second-in-command, Dane Lian, had secret orders from War Master Tsavong La. If Shay fell in the duel, Lian was supposed to unleash a backup plan. The betrayal happened immediately. From the Vong flagship legacy of torment, Lian deployed a biological weapon unlike anything the galaxy had seen. This pathogen wasn't designed to harm people. It was designed to destroy the planet itself. The plague spread through Ithor's ecosystem like wildfire. Everywhere it touched, life rotted away. Lush forests turned into black sludge. Crystal-clear rivers became streams of acid. The air itself turned toxic as billions of plants and animals just dissolved into ash. The legacy of torment didn't escape justice. It got destroyed in the chaos and crashed onto Ithor's surface, making the devastation even worse. But that was cold comfort. The damage was already done. Corran Horn had won the duel. He'd kept his word and defeated the Vong champion, and Ithor was destroyed anyway. The shockwave from this betrayal hit the galaxy harder than any weapon. Ithor wasn't just another planet. It was a symbol, a sanctuary, a place that had stood apart from galactic conflicts for generations. The Ithorians were peaceful. Their world was beautiful. And the Yuuzhan Vong had turned it into a wasteland just to prove a point. The aftermath was messy and complicated. Corran had fought to save the planet, but now millions of Ithorians were refugees with nowhere to go. People started asking questions. Did the Jedi make things worse by proposing the duel? Should they have just let the planet fall without drawing attention to it? Anti-Jedi sentiment started growing. Politicians and citizens who were already scared began blaming the Jedi Order for provoking the Yuuzhan Vong. Some worlds openly said they would have been better off if the Jedi had stayed out of it. That anger created an opening for something really dark. A group calling themselves the Peace Brigade formed out of the chaos. These collaborators decided that if the Yuuzhan Vong wanted Jedi, they'd help deliver them. The Peace Brigade started hunting Force users and turning them over to the invaders, hoping to buy safety for themselves. From a military standpoint, Ithor's fall was almost pointless. The Yuuzhan Vong didn't gain the planet's resources because they'd destroyed everything. The New Republic didn't lose strategic position because Ithor had already been surrounded. It was a stalemate that cost millions of lives, but as propaganda, it was a massive victory for the invaders. The Yuuzhan Vong had proved they would rather see a world burn than lose. They showed the galaxy that deals meant nothing, honor was a lie, and resistance was futile. Even when you won, you lost. The lesson was clear and horrifying. The Yuuzhan Vong weren't here to conquer in the traditional sense. They weren't interested in controlling territory or enslaving populations. They wanted to remake the galaxy in their image, and anything that couldn't be reshaped would simply be erased. Ithor's forests, which had grown for millennia, were gone. The floating cities where generations had lived in harmony with nature were ruins. An entire civilization was scattered to the winds. and the fear that settled over the galaxy after Ithor fell was almost as destructive as the plague itself, because now everyone knew what losing really meant. After Ithor, the New Republic went into a nosedive. The second half of 26 ABY became a nightmare of non-stop defeats that left the military and government reeling. The Yuuzhan Vong didn't slow down to celebrate their victory. They pressed forward on every front they could find. The Battle of Obroa Sky ended with another Republic loss, and suddenly the invaders had a clear path toward the core worlds. That's when panic really set in. The government tried to patch together a defensive line. They fortified 3 major worlds, Bilbringi, Bogdan, and Contruum, creating what they called the Northern Line. The plan was simple: make these fortress worlds so tough that the Yuuzhan Vong couldn't break through. The Vong just went around them. Instead of smashing into those defenses, the invaders slipped through the Salin corridor. Even worse, they cut a deal with the Hutts to pass through Hutt space. The Northern Line ended up being completely useless because nobody was actually attacking it. For 6 straight months after Ithor fell, the New Republic didn't win a single major battle. Not one. Worlds surrendered without even trying to fight because they'd seen what happened to planets that resisted. Morale wasn't just low, it was practically non-existent. The Hutts, being the Hutts, tried to play both sides. Sure, they'd let Vong fleets through their territory, but they also started leaking intelligence to the New Republic about where the invaders were going next. It worked once. The Republic got advance warning about an attack on Tinna and managed to defend it successfully. Then the Yuuzhan Vong figured out what the Hutts were doing. Instead of getting mad, the invaders got creative. They started feeding false information through the Hutts, knowing it would get back to the Republic. They leaked fake invasion plans targeting Corellia and Bothawi, 2 incredibly important systems. Admiral Sov took the bait completely. He pulled forces from across the galaxy and concentrated them at Corellia. He even planned to use Centerpoint Station, an ancient superweapon, to spring a trap on the Vong fleet when it arrived. The Yuuzhan Vong weren't going to Corellia at all. Their real target was Fondor, home to some of the galaxy's most important shipyards. They came down the shipwright's trace hyperroute in a surprise attack that caught everyone off guard. The Battle of Fondor in 26 ABY turned into one of the messiest engagements of the entire war. The Republic scrambled forces to respond. Prince Isolde showed up with a Hapan fleet to help. Suddenly you had 3 different groups, Republic, Hapan, and Vong, all shooting at each other in orbit above the shipyards. Back at Corellia, Admiral Sov still wanted to use Centerpoint Station. Young Anakin Solo got tapped to fire the weapon, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The responsibility of using a superweapon that could wipe out entire fleets was too much. His cousin, Thraken Salsolo, didn't have those same hesitations. Thraken grabbed control of Centerpoint and fired it anyway. The energy blast was massive. It tore through the Yuuzhan Vong armada at Fondor and obliterated most of their ships. Victory, right? Wrong. The blast also carved through a huge chunk of the Hapan fleet. Friendly fire on a scale nobody had ever seen. Ships that came to help got vaporized by the very weapon meant to save them. Fondor's shipyards were left in ruins from the fighting. The Republic's 3rd and 5th fleets took heavy damage from Vong bioweapons called Dovan Basal mines. And the Happen Consortium, furious about losing so many ships to an allied superweapon, pulled out of the war completely. The Battle of Fondor technically stopped the Yuuzhan Vong advance in that sector, but the cost was so high it barely counted as a win. Resources wasted, allies alienated, trust destroyed between the Republic and Hapes. It was the definition of a mess. The Hutts, meanwhile, were about to learn what happens when you try to trick the Yuuzhan Vong. Warmaster Tsavong La was done playing games with Hutt space. He sent Commander Naschoka with orders to make an example of the Hutts. The Vong Armada descended on Nalhutta and its moon Nar Shaddaa shortly after Fondor. The Hutts called for New Republic help. Nobody came. After all the double-dealing and treachery, the Republic figured the Hutts could handle their own problems. They couldn't. Naschoka unleashed biological weapons specifically designed to reshape those worlds. The Yuuzhan Vong didn't just want to conquer Hutt space. They wanted to remake it into something that fit their twisted view of what planets should look like. Nar Shaddaa got hit the hardest. The moon was basically one giant city, covered from pole to pole in skyscrapers and urban sprawl. To the Yuuzhan Vong, who worshipped living things and hated technology, it was disgusting. Their bioweapons turned Nar Shaddaa's structures into sludge. Bacteria dissolved the metal and stone. Tens of billions of beings, Hutts and others, were caught in the transformation as the moon went from bustling metropolis to barren wasteland. Nalhutta fared slightly better because it was mostly swamps to begin with. The Vong actually liked the natural environment there and decided to occupy it rather than destroy it. Some Hutts managed to escape to places like Tatooine or other remote holdings. Others got forced into serving their new Vong masters. But the Hutts aren't the type to just roll over. Crime lords who survived started organizing resistance. They formed groups like the Sissa Runners, using old war droids and hired mercenaries to fight back against the occupation. It turned into a grinding guerrilla war that tied down Vong forces for months. Naschoka's campaign in Hutt space was brutal and slow, but it enhanced his reputation. Here was a commander who could punish an entire species for their betrayal while also managing a complicated occupation. His prestige grew even as his forces got bogged down fighting Hutt rebels. The thing that made this period so demoralizing was the relentless nature of it all. Every time the Republic thought they'd found a strategy, it failed. Every time they thought they'd secured a defensive position, the Vong went around it. Every time they tried to outsmart the invaders, they got outplayed. 6 months of non-stop losses does something to people. It breaks their will. Planets that might have fought started surrendering immediately because fighting seemed pointless. Why get your world destroyed when you're just going to lose anyway? The Yuuzhan Vong were proving they could take whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and the New Republic was running out of ways to stop them. The fall after Ithor showed that the invasion wasn't just winning battles. It was breaking the galaxy's spirit, one defeat at a time. By late 26 ABY, the galaxy had a refugee crisis that made every previous disaster look small by comparison. Billions of people had nowhere to go. Their worlds were conquered or destroyed, and they were flooding into whatever systems could still take them. The New Republic government created Selcor, the Senate Committee for Refugees, to try managing the chaos. They needed somewhere to put all these displaced people, somewhere safe where they could rebuild their lives. They chose Duro. Duro was a heavily polluted industrial world that had been wrecked by centuries of manufacturing. But it was also strategically positioned and had infrastructure that could be restored. Cellcore launched a massive project to terraform Duro's surface while relocating refugees there. Engineers from across the Republic worked to clean the air, purify the water, and make the planet livable again. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, because everyone working on Duro knew the Yuuzhan Vong were getting closer every day. What they didn't know was that the enemy was already there. Nom Anor, the same agent who'd been causing trouble since before the war started, infiltrated the Duro project. He disguised himself as a scientist and got right into the middle of the terraforming efforts. From the inside, he sabotaged the work and fed intelligence straight to the invaders. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late. Duro's defenses were compromised before the battle even started. War Master Yuuzhan Vong launched his assault. Duro was valuable for multiple reasons. It had refugees the Vong could enslave or use as leverage. It had infrastructure they could reshape. And most importantly, it was a stepping stone toward the core worlds. The Yuuzhan Vong fleet hit Duro hard and fast. They overwhelmed the orbital defenses and established superiority in space. On the ground, Vong warriors poured through the settlements. Leia Organa Solo was on the surface coordinating evacuations when War Master La found her. He captured her personally and put her through terrible treatment, trying to break her spirit and use her as bait. It worked. Jacen Solo couldn't stand by while his mother was being tortured. The young Jedi rushed to her defense and ended up in direct combat with Yuuzhan Vong himself. During the fight, Jacen managed to wound the War Master badly enough that La had to retreat temporarily. But one Jedi wounding one commander wasn't enough to turn the tide. The new Republic forces at Duro were overwhelmed. The planet fell to the invaders despite every effort to save it. The Yuuzhan Vong immediately began reshaping Duro with their biotech. They destroyed the sky domes that protected settlements. The refugees who'd thought they were finally safe found themselves enslaved or worse. All that work to restore the planet got undone as the Vong transformed it into something that matched their twisted vision. Then Yuuzhan Vong made a move that changed the entire nature of the war. Standing on conquered Duro, the War Master broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. He offered a ceasefire. The Yuuzhan Vong would stop their invasion immediately if the New Republic met one simple condition: hand over every single Jedi. La blamed the Jedi for the war. He called them infidels who'd angered the Vong gods. He said if the galaxy wanted peace, all they had to do was surrender the Force users who'd been defending them. The scary thing is that people actually considered it. After months of non-stop defeats, after watching world after world fall, portions of the New Republic leadership seriously discussed whether giving up the Jedi might be worth it. They were desperate for any pause in the fighting, any chance to catch their breath and rebuild. Admiral Sov completely misjudged the situation. He thought Duro falling meant his defenses in other sectors were holding. He figured a ceasefire would let the Republic rebuild their fleets faster than the Yuuzhan Vong could grow new ships. He didn't understand that the invaders were playing him. But the offer was out there, and suddenly every Jedi in the galaxy had a price on their head. The Yuuzhan Vong placed bounties on Force users. Big bounties. The kind of money that made people forget their principles. Bounty hunters started actively hunting Jedi. The Peace Brigade, those collaborators who'd formed after Ithor, ramped up their operations to capture Force users for Vong rewards. Even worse, some populated worlds decided to save themselves by betraying the Jedi among them. Places like Deveron and Ando, systems with their own Jedi Knights who'd been protecting local citizens, turned on those defenders. They handed Force users over to the Yuuzhan Vong, hoping it would spare them from invasion. For Luke Skywalker, this was a nightmare made real. It echoed Order 66 from the Clone Wars, when the Jedi Order had been hunted to near extinction by their own clone troopers. History was repeating itself, except this time the Jedi were being betrayed by the civilians they'd sworn to protect. The Jedi Order found itself outlawed and on the run. Knights who'd spent years defending the New Republic now had to hide from that same government. Parents turned in their Force-sensitive children. Communities that had welcomed Jedi for generations suddenly wanted nothing to do with them. The psychological impact was crushing. These were people who dedicated their lives to helping others. They'd fought in the front lines of every battle, taken on the most dangerous missions, and sacrificed everything to defend the innocent. And their reward was becoming the galaxy's most wanted. Some Jedi went into hiding immediately. Others tried to keep fighting, but had to watch their backs constantly. A few turned themselves in, thinking their sacrifice might actually bring peace. It didn't. The Yuuzhan Vong just took them and kept conquering anyway. The next few months became known as the Jedi Purge. Force users disappeared from public life. Temples and training centers emptied out. The bright presence of the Jedi, which had been growing since Luke re-established the Order, dimmed across the galaxy. Savong La's ceasefire offer was brilliant in its cruelty. It didn't actually stop the war. The Yuuzhan Vong kept advancing, kept taking systems, kept reshaping worlds, but now they had the galaxy doing part of their work for them. Citizens hunting Jedi meant the invaders didn't have to waste resources tracking down Force users. The fall of Duro and the ceasefire that followed marked the lowest point yet. The New Republic was losing territory, losing allies, and now losing the very defenders who'd been their best hope. The Jedi who'd stood between the galaxy and destruction were being hunted like criminals. And through it all, the Yuuzhan Vong kept coming, stronger and more organized than ever, knowing they'd successfully turned the galaxy against itself. Luke Skywalker wasn't about to let his Jedi get picked off one by one. When the galaxy turned on the Force users, he went underground and built an escape network that would make any smuggler proud. He called it the Great River, an underground railroad for people with Force powers. Han Solo helped, along with sympathetic officers in the New Republic military who still remembered the Jedi had saved their lives more than once. Secret safe houses popped up across the galaxy, hidden routes that could ferry Jedi from dangerous territory to somewhere they might survive. Luke even found some truly remote hiding spots. The Maw, a cluster of black holes where an old Imperial research base sat abandoned, became a sanctuary. Another refuge got established on a planetoid called Eclipse, so far off the map that most navigation computers didn't even have coordinates for it. These weren't permanent solutions. They were temporary bandages on a wound that kept getting bigger. But at least they gave hunted Jedi somewhere to go. Then the Yuuzhan Vong went after the heart of the Jedi Order itself. Yavin 4 had been Luke's academy for years. It was where he trained young Force users, where kids learned to control their powers and become knights. The temple there held decades of history and hope for the future of the Order. A new Republic senator, desperate and terrified, made a deal with the invaders. He handed over Yavin 4, thinking maybe sacrificing one Jedi Academy would satisfy the Yuuzhan Vong and buy peace for everyone else. It didn't work that way. In early 27 ABY, Vong forces descended on Yavin 4 to round up every student they could find. The evacuation was chaotic and desperate. Teachers and older students scrambled to get younglings off the planet before the invaders arrived. Anakin Solo got word that his friend Tahiri Vela was trapped there. Orders or no orders, the 17-year-old Jedi Knight grabbed a ship and headed straight into danger. He led a rescue mission that turned into one of the gutsiest operations of the war. Here's where things got weird. Anakin ran into a Yuuzhan Vong warrior named Vua Rapung, who'd been shamed by his own people. Rapung had lost his status and been cast out, which in Vong society was basically a fate worse than anything. Instead of fighting Anakin, Rapung helped him. Together, they tore through the Vong occupation force. Anakin rescued Tahiri and other students, even taking down the Master Shaper who'd been torturing her. Vua Rapung gave up everything in the process, but his choice to fight alongside a Jedi sparked something unexpected. Lower caste Yuuzhan Vong, the ones called Shamed Ones who'd been treated like garbage by their own society, heard about what happened. A warrior fighting alongside a Jedi? That went against everything they'd been taught. But it also gave them hope that maybe their rigid caste system wasn't the only way to live. They started calling it the Jedi heresy. Whispers spread through the conquered worlds that the Jedi weren't enemies of the gods. Maybe they were something else entirely. Maybe the whole invasion was built on lies. The Yuuzhan Vong leadership noticed these whispers and did not like them one bit. Meanwhile, the ceasefire everyone thought might last kept ticking along for months. The Vong acted like they were honoring the agreement. No major attacks, no big pushes. The new Republic used the time to rebuild their fleets and strengthen defenses. What they didn't see was that the invaders were doing the same thing, only better. At conquered Cernpidal, the Yuuzhan Vong had set up a ship womb, basically a biological factory that could grow new warships. While the Republic was patching together damaged vessels and trying to build new ones the old-fashioned way, the Vong were breeding an armada. In late 27 ABY, Savong La dropped the pretense and broke the ceasefire. The target was Yagdul, homeworld of the given species and a crucial hyperspace junction. Take Yagdul and you controlled routes to other strategic systems, including Thyfera, where they made Bacta, the miracle healing substance the entire galaxy depended on. Pure luck put Anakin Solo, Tahiri Vela, and Corran Horn at Yagdul when the attack came. The three Jedi helped local defenders repel the assault and saved the planet. But the damage was done. The ceasefire was officially over, and everyone finally understood what should have been obvious from the start. You can't appease the Yuuzhan Vong. They don't want peace. They want everything, and they'll say whatever it takes to position themselves for the next strike. Then the invaders unveiled something that made every Jedi's blood run cold. Voxin, creatures engineered specifically to hunt Force users. The Yuuzhan Vong had taken Vornskers, animals that could already sense the Force, and twisted them into something far worse. These things were predators with one purpose: find Jedi and take them down. The Vong cloned Voxine on Mirka and sent them across the galaxy on assassination missions. A Voxin got Jedi Master Elisa on Corellia. Another nearly caused a disaster on Coruscant before Han and Leia managed to stop it. Every report of a Voxin sighting sent panic through the remaining Jedi because these creatures were terrifyingly good at their job. The Order faced a simple equation. Either they destroyed the source of the Voxin, or the species would hunt them to extinction. There was no middle ground. The Jedi Council approved a strike mission to Mirka. The target was the Voxin Queen, the original creature they were cloning all the others from. Take her out and you shut down the whole operation. Anakin Solo, despite being only 17, got tapped to lead the team. The kid had already proved himself at Yavin 4 and Yagdul. He was a natural leader, and more importantly, he had the kind of connection to the Force that made other Jedi follow him into impossible situations. The strike team read like a roster of the next generation of Jedi Knights. Jacen and Jaina Solo, Anakin's siblings. Tahiri Vela, who'd been through the Yavin 4 horror with him. Tenel Ka, a princess from Hapes. Zek, Lobaka the Wookiee Jedi, and others. Young, talented, and about to walk into one of the deadliest missions of the entire war. The infiltration of the world ship facility on Mirka was brutal from the start. They fought through waves of guards and Voxin, losing team members with every corridor they pushed through. The facility was a nightmare of biological weapons and Yuuzhan Vong warriors who knew the Jedi were coming. They found the Queen and managed to take her down, ending the Voxin threat permanently. The cost was almost too high to bear. Most of the strike team didn't make it out. Young Jedi who should have had decades ahead of them fell in those corridors, and Anakin Solo, the leader who'd brought them this far, made the choice that would define him forever. With Vong warriors closing in and the survivors needing time to escape, Anakin stood his ground. He blazed with Force energy like a supernova, holding off dozens of enemies while his team ran. There was no question what would happen. Anakin knew he wasn't walking away from this. He didn't. Jacen Solo watched his younger brother fall and couldn't do anything to stop it. Then the Yuuzhan Vong grabbed Jacen too, dragging him away as the survivors fled with Anakin's body. The mission succeeded. The Voxin Queen was gone, and the Jedi Order would survive. But the Solo family was shattered. Han and Leia had already lost Chewbacca. Now their youngest son was gone too, and their middle child was a prisoner of the enemy. The grief that hit Luke's Jedi Order after Mirka was like nothing they'd experienced. These weren't distant casualties or strangers who'd fallen in battle. These were the bright young talents who were supposed to carry the Order forward. Friends, siblings, students who'd trained together for years. Anakin Solo had been special. Everyone knew it. He had that same spark Luke had, that connection to the Force that came along once in a generation. And he'd given it all up to save his team and end the Voxin threat. The Mirka mission proved the Jedi could still fight back, still hurt the Yuuzhan Vong in meaningful ways. But it also showed just how much the war was costing them. Victory wasn't free. It came with a price that kept getting higher. While the Jedi were still reeling from losing Anakin Solo, War Master Tsavong La saw his opening. The New Republic was distracted, grieving, and looking the wrong direction. Perfect time to go for the throat. Everyone expected the next big attack to come from the south. All the intelligence pointed that way. Republic forces positioned themselves accordingly, setting up defenses where they thought the hammer would fall. La came from the north instead. In 27 ABY, he launched Operation Battle Plan Coruscant. The name left no doubt about the target. This wasn't a raid or a feint. This was the invasion's endgame, a massive assault designed to take the galactic capital itself. The Yuuzhan Vong armada crashed through the northern line like it wasn't even there. Remember those fortress worlds Bilbringi, Bogdan, and Contruum that were supposed to stop any invasion? They fell in days. Boreas got overrun. System after system collapsed as the Vong steamrolled toward Coruscant. By the time Admiral Sov realized what was happening and repositioned his fleets, the invaders were already at the doorstep. 3 entire Republic fleets concentrated around Coruscant, the biggest defensive force assembled since the war began. It wouldn't be enough. The Yuuzhan Vong showed up in overwhelming numbers. Their world ships and organic vessels filled the space around Coruscant like a swarm of locusts. But the planet had one thing going for it. Shields, powerful planetary shields that had protected the capital for generations. Getting through those shields should have taken weeks of bombardment. The Vong found a faster way. They grabbed refugee ships, vessels packed with civilians fleeing from conquered worlds, thousands of innocent people who thought they were escaping to safety. The Yuuzhan Vong hijacked those ships and turned them into weapons. They hurled the refugee vessels at Coruscant's shields like missiles. Think about that for a second. People who'd already lost everything, running for their lives, getting used as ammunition. The ships smashed into the shields one after another. Each impact weakened the defenses a little more. Each collision meant thousands more people gone. New Republic commanders watching this unfold faced an impossible choice. General Garm Bel Iblis had to decide whether to shoot down those refugee ships before they hit the shields. If he did nothing, the shields would fall. If he gave the order to fire, he'd be destroying the very people he was supposed to protect. Bel Iblis made the call. He ordered his forces to target the incoming vessels. Better to stop them quickly than let the shields collapse and doom everyone on the planet. Not every officer agreed with that decision. Some refused the order outright, but enough followed through to thin out the barrage. It didn't matter. The shields fell anyway. Under the constant impacts and plasma bombardments, Coruscant's defenses cracked and then shattered completely. Suddenly, the most protected planet in the galaxy was wide open. Vong landing craft and bioweapons poured through the wreckage, descending on the city-covered world in relentless waves. The Battle of Coruscant turned into street-by-street fighting. The capital's endless cityscape became a war zone. Yuuzhan Vong warriors flooded through the streets, and defenders tried to hold them back block by block. The fighting was desperate and chaotic. Every building became a potential fortress. Every intersection turned into a battlefield. The Republic forces made the invaders pay for every meter of ground. But they were outnumbered and getting pushed back steadily. The Vong just kept coming, wave after wave, grinding down the defense through sheer numbers. As enemy troops converged on the Imperial Palace, Borsk found himself facing the end. The Bothan chief of state had made plenty of mistakes during the war. His policies had left the Republic unprepared. His decisions had cost lives. But when the moment came, he chose to go out on his own terms. Failure refused to evacuate. He stayed in his command bunker as Yuuzhan Vong warriors breached the palace defenses and fought their way toward him. He could hear them coming through the corridors, getting closer with every second. When the first warriors burst into his bunker, failure triggered a baradium bomb he'd been keeping as insurance. The explosion was massive. It vaporized the Imperial Palace, turned failure into vapor, and took 25,000 Yuuzhan Vong troops with him. The detonation was so powerful it could be seen from orbit, a miniature sun blooming in the heart of the capital. For one brief moment, it looked like that sacrifice might turn the tide. The Vong advance stumbled. Their vanguard was headless. Defenders rallied, thinking maybe they could still hold. They couldn't. Despite failure's final stand and countless other acts of courage, Coruscant fell. Exactly 2 years after the Yuuzhan Vong invasion had begun at Helska 4, the galactic capital was theirs. The invaders wasted no time. They started reshaping the planet immediately. Vong forming, they called it. Bioengineered organisms spread across the cityscape, breaking down technology and replacing it with living structures. The endless urban sprawl that had defined Coruscant for millennia began transforming into something organic and alien. The Yuuzhan Vong even renamed the planet Yuuzhan Tar after their original homeworld they'd lost centuries ago. In their minds, they were reclaiming what the gods had promised them. In reality, they were erasing one of the galaxy's most important symbols. Trillions of people were caught in the transformation. Some got enslaved to work on Vong projects. Others disappeared into the chaos. The precise number who didn't survive the battle and occupation would never be known. Too many people, too much destruction, too fast. The New Republic government ceased to exist in any meaningful way. With the capital gone and the chief of state gone, there was no centralized leadership anymore. Military commanders and political leaders scattered in every direction, fleeing to whatever systems still seemed safe. Mon Calamari became the fallback position for a lot of refugees and remnant forces. Other leaders headed to the Outer Rim or deep into sectors the Vong hadn't reached yet. But mostly, people just ran. The galactic capital had fallen. If Coruscant couldn't hold, nowhere was truly safe. The psychological impact was crushing. Coruscant had stood for thousands of years as the center of galactic civilization. The old Republic had ruled from there. The Empire had made it their throne world. The New Republic had reclaimed it as a symbol of freedom. And now it belonged to extragalactic invaders who were literally growing their own ecosystem over the ruins. For citizens across the galaxy watching this unfold, the message was clear. The war wasn't just going badly, it was lost. The Yuuzhan Vong had proven they could take anything they wanted. No defense was strong enough. No world was safe enough. No government could protect its people. The fall of Coruscant was the darkest hour of the entire war. Everything that came before, all the losses and defeats and betrayals, had been building to this moment. And now that it had happened, the question wasn't whether the galaxy could fight back. The question was whether there would be anything left to fight for. The New Republic was broken, but not dead. After Coruscant fell, what remained of the government scattered like leaves in a storm. No central leadership, no unified command, just fragments of a once great civilization trying to figure out what came next. A Quarren senator named Puo declared himself acting chief of state. Nobody really took him seriously. His authority was shaky at best, and most military commanders ignored him completely. The real power vacuum wasn't getting filled because everyone was too busy running for their lives. What used to be the New Republic now controlled maybe a tenth of what it had before. A narrow strip of the outer rim from Mon Calamari to Kashyyyk. A few isolated sectors that hadn't fallen yet. Secret bases hidden in places like the deep core where the Jedi had gone to ground. That was it. Everything else belonged to the Yuuzhan Vong. But General Wedge Antilles wasn't ready to give up. Leading Fleet Group 3 in retreat from Coruscant, Wedge made a choice that surprised everyone. Instead of running to safety, he turned around and counterattacked. His target was Borleas, a planet the Vong had taken on their way to the capital, but left only lightly defended. Wedge hit Borleas hard and fast, overwhelming the token garrison there. Suddenly, the New Republic had a foothold near Coruscant itself. Borleas became a sanctuary for refugees fleeing the fallen capital and a forward base for what remained of Republic military forces. The Yuuzhan Vong noticed and decided that couldn't stand. They sent forces to take Borleas back. Wedge was ready for them. What followed was one of the most legendary defensive stands of the entire war. Wedge fortified Borleas with everything he could scrape together. Elite squadrons like Rogue and Wraith flew constant patrols. Ground forces dug in and prepared for waves of attackers. And when the Vong came, they found defenders who refused to break. The Republic repelled 2 major counterattacks on Borleas. Each time the invaders thought they'd overwhelm the defenders, Wedge had another trick ready. He knew he couldn't match the Vong ship for ship, so he got creative. Operation Emperor's Spear was the boldest move of the campaign. Wedge took the Lusankya, a superstar destroyer left over from Imperial days, and turned it into the biggest missile in galactic history. He aimed it straight at a Yuuzhan Vong world ship and let it fly. The Lusankya crashed into the enemy vessel at ramming speed. Both ships were obliterated in the collision, taking the world ship's command crew and half the Vong fleet coordination with them. It was expensive but effective. 1 superstar destroyer for an entire world ship and the disruption of enemy operations. Wedge would make that trade every time. Borleas held for weeks against impossible odds. The victory didn't change the strategic situation much, but it changed something more important. It changed how people felt. If Wedge could hold Borleas, maybe the war wasn't completely lost. Maybe there was still a chance to fight back. The defense also undermined Senator Poe politically. He'd been preaching surrender and accommodation with the Yuuzhan Vong. Wedge proved that fighting back could actually work, which made Poe look like a coward and a fool. Meanwhile, the survivors from Anakin Solo's Merca mission ended up at Haps. Jaina Solo and the other Jedi who'd made it out arrived just as the Yuuzhan Vong decided to invade the Haps consortium. Haps was wealthy, powerful, and had stayed mostly neutral up to this point. The Vong wanted to change that by conquering the cluster and adding its resources to their empire. They also had help from inside. Traitors within the Hapan government took out Queen Mother Tenennial Dijo, trying to weaken resistance before the invasion. Jaina and her friend Tenel Ka, a Hapan princess, weren't having it. They exposed the plot and rallied the defenders. When the Battle of Hapes began, Jaina's tactical insights from fighting the Vong made a real difference. The Hapan Navy smashed the invading fleet and even took down War Master La's son in the fighting. Princess Tenel-Ka took the throne and immediately committed Hapes to the war on the Republic's side. That was huge. The Hapan Consortium brought ships, resources, and a fresh military that hadn't been ground down by years of defeats. Finally, the Republic had a real ally instead of just more refugees. Back on conquered Coruscant, Jacen Solo was having the worst time of his life. For months, people assumed he'd been lost on Merkur. But Jacen was alive and in the hands of Vergere, that mysterious Jedi who'd been living with the Yuuzhan Vong for decades. Vergere put Jacen through trials that made regular torture look merciful. She used the embrace of pain, a Vong device designed to reshape prisoners through suffering. But she wasn't trying to break him. She was trying to teach him something about the Force that the Jedi had forgotten or never known. Jacen learned. Whether what he learned was wisdom or something darker, that was still up for debate. But he came out of the experience changed in fundamental ways. With Vergere's help, Jacen escaped captivity. On their way out, they sabotaged the World Brain, the massive organism the Yuuzhan Vong were using to control Coruscant's transformation. The brain started acting erratic and ignoring orders, making the whole Vong-forming process unstable. Jedi Knight Gana Rysode bought them time to escape. He made his stand at the well of the World Brain, holding off wave after wave of Vong warriors. Gana became a legend that day, not just among the Republic, but among the Yuuzhan Vong themselves. They'd never seen someone fight with that kind of courage, and it shook their certainty about the weakness of their enemies. By early 28 ABY, Jacen made it back to his family. He wasn't the same person who'd gone to Merkur. The things Vergere had taught him, the experiences he'd endured, they'd fundamentally altered his understanding of the Force and his place in the galaxy. The scattered remnants of New Republic leadership started pulling together at Mon Calamari. The Mon Cals had been loyal allies since the days of the rebellion, and they offered their world and shipyards as a sanctuary. Throughout late 27 ABY, the Republic rebuilt its defense fleet there piece by piece. Analysts looking at the situation noticed something interesting. The Yuuzhan Vong had overextended themselves taking Coruscant. Their supply lines were stretched thin. Their losses had been significant even in victory. They'd conquered so much territory so fast that they couldn't properly consolidate it all. That realization sparked hope. Maybe the invaders weren't unstoppable. Maybe they'd bitten off more than they could chew. If the Republic could get organized, bring in allies, and hit the Vong where they were weak, there might actually be a path to victory. The war was entering a new phase. The New Republic as it had existed was gone, but something new was forming in its place. Not just a government or a military, but a true alliance of every remaining power willing to stand against the Yuuzhan Vong. Survival wasn't enough anymore. It was time to start winning. In 28 ABY, the scattered remnants of the New Republic did something that should have happened years earlier. They admitted the old system was broken and voted to dissolve their government completely. Senator Poe's brief attempt at leadership had been a disaster. His defeatist attitude and calls for surrender had undermined what little confidence remained in the government. The defense of Borleas proved him wrong, and now nobody wanted to follow him anywhere. An emergency election got called. The surviving leaders needed someone who could actually unite what was left of the galaxy and turn the tide against the Yuuzhan Vong. The main candidates were Kal Omas, an Alderaanian who supported the Jedi, and Fior Rodan, a hardliner who blamed Force users for the whole mess. the politicking got intense. Every vote mattered when you were trying to rebuild a government from scratch. Lando Calrissian and Talon Karrde stepped in with the Smugglers' Alliance. These weren't politicians or military commanders. They were business people who understood how to move resources and swing votes when it counted. Their intervention tipped the scales toward Cal Omas. Omas won and immediately made his first big move. He proclaimed the formation of the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances. Most people just called it the Galactic Alliance. This wasn't the New Republic with a new coat of paint. It was a complete restructuring of how the galaxy would govern and fight. The Galactic Alliance had stronger central command, clearer military authority, and a mandate to do whatever it took to win the war. No more endless committee debates while planets burned. No more half measures and political compromises that satisfied nobody. This was the turning point. The galaxy's defenders weren't a faltering republic anymore. They were an alliance that meant business. Cal Omas and his team started bringing everyone they could into the fold. First priority was the Imperial Remnant. Grand Admiral Pellaeon had pulled his forces back after Ithor and stayed mostly neutral while the Republic collapsed. But the Yuuzhan Vong weren't going to let the Empire sit this one out forever. In 28 ABY, the invaders hit the Imperial capital Bastion and other Imperial worlds hard. Pellaeon led the defense personally and nearly got taken out in the fighting. For a while, everyone thought the old admiral was gone. Bastion got devastated in the assault, but Pellaeon survived and he was angry. He regrouped Imperial forces and struck back at Borosk, catching Commander Vorik's fleet and tearing it apart. When Vorik tried to outflank the Imperials at Yaga Minor, Pellaeon was ready again. A surprise appearance by Lumia, a dark Jedi who had her own reasons for causing chaos, helped confuse the Vong forces enough for the Imperials to repel the attack. These victories convinced the Imperial Remnant's warlords that cooperation was the only path forward. By mid-28 ABY, Pellaeon formally allied the Empire with the Galactic Alliance. Star destroyers that had fought against the rebellion were now fighting alongside Mon Calamari cruisers against a common enemy. The Hapes Consortium was already on board thanks to Tenel Ka. Even the Mandalorians, those legendary warriors led by Boba Fett's commandos, offered support in certain battles. After years of fighting alone and losing, the galaxy's major powers were finally working together. Around this time, someone in the Galactic Alliance military came up with a truly terrifying idea. Alpha Red, a bioweapon specifically designed to target Yuuzhan Vong organisms. Scientists had figured out how to weaponize the same Buffer pollen that hurt Vong armor, turning it into something that could wipe out the entire invading species. Some commanders pushed hard for deploying Alpha Red immediately. Why fight a long conventional war when you could end it with one biological strike? Just release the weapon and watch every Yuuzhan Vong in the galaxy die. The Jedi were horrified when they found out about Alpha Red. Luke Skywalker and Vergere, who'd just returned from her time with Jason, argued that using a weapon like that would make the Galactic Alliance just as bad as the invaders. You don't save the galaxy by committing genocide, even against an enemy as brutal as the Yuuzhan Vong. Vergere took matters into her own hands and sabotaged the Alpha Red sample, delaying any potential deployment. Chief Omas faced a choice. Use the bioweapon and possibly end the war quickly, or trust in conventional forces and allies to win the right way. Omas sided with Luke. Alpha Red would be a last resort only, something to consider if every other option failed and the galaxy faced complete annihilation. Otherwise, it stayed locked away. The Galactic Alliance would win through strength and strategy, not through becoming monsters themselves. That decision kept the war from turning into something even darker than it already was. Uncontrolled biological warfare could have devastated ecosystems across the galaxy, even affecting species that weren't involved in the conflict. Sometimes the hardest choice is refusing to take the easy path, even when you're desperate. While all this political and military reorganization was happening, Admiral Jial Akbar was watching from Mon Calamari. The legendary commander had retired years ago, content to let younger officers handle the fighting. But watching the galaxy burn brought him back. Akbar came out of retirement as an advisor in 28 ABY. His experience from the rebellion and decades of military service made him invaluable. He started working on a plan that would deliver the Yuuzhan Vong a blow they wouldn't see coming. His target wasn't a planet or a shipyard. It was War Master Tsavong La himself. Take out the enemy's supreme commander, and you might just turn the entire war around. Akbar designed an elaborate trap centered on a remote moon called Ebak 9. The pieces were moving into place. The Galactic Alliance had united the galaxy's remaining powers. They'd chosen to fight with honor rather than resort to genocide. And now they had a plan to hit back harder than the Yuuzhan Vong had ever been hit before. For the first time since the invasion began, the defenders weren't just reacting to enemy moves. They were taking the initiative. The Yuuzhan Vong had spent years on the offensive, conquering world after world while the Republic scrambled to respond. That was about to change. The Galactic Alliance was done playing defense. It was time to show the invaders what happened when you pushed the galaxy too far and gave its people a reason to unite against you. The counter-offensive was coming, and Ebak 9 would be where everything shifted. Admiral Akbar's plan was brilliantly simple. Make the Yuuzhan Vong think they'd found something valuable, then crush them when they came to take it. Ebak 9 was a barren moon deep in the deep core, the kind of place nobody would normally care about. But through carefully planted intelligence and strategic jamming, Akbar convinced War Master Tsavong La that vital Alliance supply depots were hidden there. The timing was perfect. Alliance forces had been running successful raids against Vong positions, and La was getting frustrated. When his spies reported a vulnerable target that could cripple the Alliance's ability to keep fighting, he jumped at the opportunity. In late 28 ABY, La committed an enormous attack force to assault Ebak 9. He thought this would be the blow that ended the war, the strike that broke the Alliance's back and left them unable to resist. What La didn't know was that Ebak 9 sat at the end of a dead-end hyperspace route. Once you jumped into that system, there weren't many ways out. It was the perfect place for a trap if you could get your enemy to walk into it willingly. The Yuuzhan Vong fleet poured into the Ebak system, expecting to find supply depots and panicked defenders. Instead, they found Alliance warships emerging from hyperspace behind them, cutting off every escape route. Tsavong La realized too late he'd been played. But the War Master refused to retreat even when he understood the situation. In his mind, running would be a greater disgrace than going down fighting. So he fought on, ordering his forces to engage despite being surrounded and outnumbered. The Battle of Ebak 9 turned into a slaughter. Cornered in the deep core with nowhere to run, the Yuuzhan Vong armada got torn apart by concentrated Alliance fire. Ships that had seemed unstoppable during the invasion's early days were getting blown to pieces. World ships that could carry thousands of warriors became debris fields. The invaders who'd conquered half the galaxy couldn't even defend themselves properly. Dozens of Vong vessels got destroyed in the crossfire. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. The Yuuzhan Vong were suffering their worst space defeat of the entire war, and there was nothing Savong La could do to turn it around. Rather than accept defeat, La made one final desperate move. He gathered what warriors he could and led a ground assault on Ebak 9's moon, where Alliance forces had set up in old mining tunnels. If he couldn't win in space, maybe he could at least claim a symbolic victory by taking down some prominent Jedi. Jaina Solo was there, the daughter of Han and Leia, sister to the fallen Anakin Solo, and one of the most talented young Jedi in the Order. Prophecy had dubbed her the Sword of the Jedi, and she was about to prove why. The fighting in those tunnels was brutal and close quarters. Vong warriors and Alliance defenders crashed into each other in narrow passages where tactics and strategy mattered less than raw determination. Savong La pushed forward, trying to reach the Jedi and salvage something from his catastrophic failure. Jaina Solo met him head-on. The War Master who'd orchestrated the conquest of Coruscant and the near destruction of the New Republic faced off against a Jedi Knight barely into her 20s. They fought in single combat while the battle raged around them. Jaina won. She struck down Savong La, ending the War Master's life and his campaign of conquest in one decisive blow. While that duel was happening, Vergere made her own sacrifice. The mysterious Jedi who'd lived among the Vong and taught Jacen Solo crashed her ship into the shield protecting the tunnel complex. The impact took down the shields and exposed the Vong ground forces to vacuum. Vergere went with them, ensuring none of the enemy warriors survived the assault. When the dust settled at Ebak 9, the Yuuzhan Vong had lost everything. Their War Master was gone. Their elite fleet was scattered debris. Their aura of invincibility was shattered beyond repair. The Alliance victory exceeded every expectation. Morale across the galaxy went from cautious hope to genuine confidence for the first time in years. People who'd been resigned to eventual defeat started believing they might actually survive this war. Cal Omus seized the moment to formalize everything the Galactic Alliance represented. He made official announcements about the government restructuring, established a new High Council, and got everyone on the same page about how they'd fight from here on out. The Alliance wasn't just a military coalition anymore. It was a real government with real authority. On the Yuuzhan Vong side, Supreme Overlord Shimra went ballistic when news of Ebak 9 reached him. He blamed everyone except himself for the disaster. Savong La's loyalists got rounded up and executed for the War Master's failure. In Shimra's twisted logic, the defeat had to be the result of treachery rather than admitting the Alliance had outsmarted them. Shimra promoted Nas Choka to War Master, bringing him back from the ongoing grind in Hutt space. Choka was experienced and ruthless, but he was inheriting a situation that had just gotten considerably more complicated. Nom Anor, whose intelligence failures had helped lead to the Ebak trap, found himself in serious trouble. Rather than face Shimra's wrath, he went into hiding on conquered Coruscant. But Nom Anor wasn't the type to just disappear. He adopted a disguise and a new identity as Yusha, a prophet for the growing movement among the Shamed Ones. The Jedi heresy, that had started with Vua Rapung fighting alongside Anakin Solo had been spreading through the lower castes of Yuuzhan Vong society. Workers and shamed ones who'd been treated like garbage by the warrior and shaper castes were questioning everything they'd been taught. Some believed the Jedi weren't enemies, but saviors sent by the gods. Nom Anor saw opportunity in that dissent. As Yuuzhan, he fanned the flames of rebellion among Coruscant's underclass Vong. He spread stories and prophecies that undermined Shimra's authority. It was classic Nom Anor, causing chaos from the shadows. But this time, he was doing it to his own people, and that chaos would become a serious problem for the Yuuzhan Vong leadership. The Battle of Ebak 9 was the turning point everyone had been waiting for. After years of defeats and retreats, the Galactic Alliance had delivered a knockout blow. The Yuuzhan Vong weren't unstoppable. They could be outmaneuvered, outfought, and beaten decisively. The war wasn't over. The invaders still controlled huge swathes of the galaxy, including Coruscant. But the momentum had shifted. The Alliance wasn't just surviving anymore. They were winning, and everyone knew it. For the first time since Helska 4, the defenders had reason to believe they'd see the end of this invasion and live to rebuild what had been lost. Shimra wasn't the type to take a loss quietly. The supreme overlord of the Yuuzhan Vong watched his war master get taken down at Ebak 9 and decided the galaxy needed a reminder of who they were dealing with. In early 29 ABY, the Vong lashed out everywhere they could reach. This wasn't strategic conquest anymore. This was rage. They hit in Zoth and completely wiped out the Yavetha. An entire species erased because they were there and vulnerable. The Siruvi Imperium got raided. Bakura came under assault. Planets like Barab 1, Rutan, and Belderone that nobody had been paying much attention to suddenly found themselves under attack. These moves weren't about gaining territory or resources. The Yuuzhan Vong already controlled plenty of both. This was about sending a message. We lost one battle, but we can still reach out and destroy you anytime we want. Fear us. And it worked. Watching the Vong rampage across the fringes reminded everyone that Ebak 9 hadn't ended the war. The invaders were wounded but still incredibly dangerous. Shimra had bigger plans than just terrorizing minor systems, though. He knew exactly where to strike to hurt the Alliance most. Mon Calamari, the temporary capital and home to the shipyards keeping the Alliance fleet operational. Take Mon Calamari, and you'd cripple the Alliance's ability to build new ships or coordinate their forces. It would be Coruscant all over again, except this time there'd be nowhere left to retreat. In 29 ABY, while the Alliance was planning their own counteroffensive, the Yuuzhan Vong launched a massive assault on Mon Calamari. Half the Alliance defense fleet was stationed there, which meant the space battle above the ocean world was absolutely enormous. Ships crashed into each other in orbit. Plasma fire lit up the sky. Mon Calamari's cities and shipyards took heavy damage as the fighting spread across the system. The defenders held the line, but barely. This wasn't a comfortable victory where you knew you'd win eventually. This was a knife fight where one mistake meant everyone lost. Then something completely unexpected happened. Right in the middle of the battle, with Mon Calamari on the verge of falling, a living planet appeared out of hyperspace above Coruscant. Zonama Sekot, a world that shouldn't exist according to everything anyone knew about how planets worked, just showed up in the capital system like it had been invited to a party. The Yuuzhan Vong leadership absolutely panicked. Some thought it was their gods showing up to judge them. Others believed it was the return of their ancient homeworld, the one they'd lost millennia ago. Shimra didn't care which theory was right. He just knew that a living planet appearing above his capital was a problem that needed dealing with immediately. He recalled War Master Naschoka and a huge chunk of the invasion fleet from Mon Calamari. Just pulled them out of the battle and ordered them back to Coruscant to figure out what Zonama Sekot was and how to handle it. With the enemy suddenly retreating, the Battle of Mon Calamari ended in an Alliance victory. The planet was scarred and the shipyards were damaged, but they'd held. And they'd only held because a mysterious living world had shown up at exactly the right moment to terrify the invaders into leaving. Nobody on the Alliance side knew what to make of Zonama Sekot either, but they weren't complaining about the timing. While all this chaos was unfolding, the Imperial Remnant was having its own moment. Grand Admiral Pellaeon had thrown the Empire's full weight behind the Galactic Alliance, and now he was proving that cooperation actually worked. Imperial forces liberated planets across the northern territories that had been under Vong control. At Yaga Minor, Pellaeon faced off against Commander Vorik's fleet one more time. The battle secured the Remnant's key shipyards and sent a clear message that the Empire was back in the game. Some Imperial officers had been skeptical about working with the Alliance. Moff Flennick and others from the Old Guard thought they should stay independent, maybe even try to use the war to rebuild Imperial power while everyone else was distracted. The victories at Yaga Minor and other systems shut those voices down. Cooperation with the Galactic Alliance was bringing wins. Fighting alone had only led to devastation at Bastion and other Imperial worlds. The choice was obvious when you looked at the results. Star destroyers that had once enforced the Emperor's will were now fighting alongside rebel ships to save the galaxy. Stormtroopers who'd spent decades as symbols of oppression were defending worlds from an even worse threat. It was the kind of alliance nobody would have predicted 5 years earlier, but war has a way of making strange allies out of old enemies. The scales were tipping, not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. The Yuuzhan Vong still held massive territory, including Coruscant. They still had huge fleets and millions of warriors. But the momentum that had carried them through years of conquest was slowing down. Ebak 9 had proven they could be beaten decisively. Mon Calamari showed they could be forced to retreat. The Imperial victories demonstrated that when the galaxy's powers worked together, they could push back and reclaim lost ground. And lurking over all of this was Zonama Sekot, a mystery that both sides were trying to understand. The Yuuzhan Vong saw it as either divine judgment or their ancestral home. The Alliance saw it as a potential game changer that might hold answers to ending the war. Whatever Zonama Sekot was, its arrival had shifted everything. The Yuuzhan Vong couldn't ignore a living planet appearing in their capital system. The Alliance couldn't ignore a potential advantage that had literally dropped out of hyperspace at the perfect moment. The war was entering its final phase. Both sides knew it. The question was who'd adapt faster and strike the decisive blow that would end this nightmare once and for all. Before Vergere gave herself up at Ebak 9, she'd told Luke Skywalker something that stuck with him. Zonama Sekot, a mysterious living planet, was somehow connected to the Yuuzhan Vong's origins. If the Jedi could find it, Sekot might hold the key to ending the war. Luke wasn't going to ignore a lead like that. In 28 ABY, he put together an expedition and headed into the unknown regions to track down this impossible world. Jason and Jaina Solo came along, still dealing with the grief of losing Anakin. Saba Sabatine, a Barabel Jedi Master, joined them. Others volunteered for what everyone knew would be a dangerous journey into uncharted space. Grand Admiral Pellaeon helped them out with navigation data and a ship capable of making the trip. The Imperial Remnant had maps of areas beyond known space that most people didn't even know existed. If anyone could find a living planet hiding in the void, it would be this team with those resources. They searched through Chiss territory and beyond, following hints and rumors and whatever force guidance Luke could sense. Eventually, they found it. Zonama Sekot, sitting in the Classe Ephemera system like it had been waiting for them. The planet was beautiful, lush, and green, covered in forests and organic structures that seemed to grow rather than be built. But the real surprise came when the Jedi realized the planet was conscious. Zonama Sekot wasn't just alive in the way ecosystems are alive. It was aware, intelligent, and capable of communicating. When the Jedi landed, Sekot tested them. Not with violence or tricks, but with questions and challenges to understand who they were and what they wanted. Once satisfied they meant no harm, the planet agreed to talk. That's when the Jedi learned something that changed everything. Zonama Sekot wasn't some random anomaly. It was a seed of the original Yuuzhan Vong homeworld, launched into this galaxy centuries ago when their species had fled some ancient catastrophe. The organic technology covering Sekot looked just like Yuuzhan Vong biotech because it came from the same source. The living ships, the biotechnology, all of it traced back to the same origins. The Yuuzhan Vong and Zonama Sekot were connected through history that stretched back millennia. Sekot remembered when Vong scouts had visited decades earlier. The encounter hadn't gone well, and the planet had fled deeper into the unknown regions to avoid them. But now, hearing about the invasion and the devastation it had caused, Sekot understood the stakes. Luke made his pitch. Come with us. Help end this war. Show the Yuuzhan Vong that their gods haven't abandoned them and that there's another way forward besides endless conquest. Zonama Sekot agreed. The living planet decided to travel to the heart of the conflict and confront the invaders directly. It was a huge gamble, but Sekot saw it as a chance to heal wounds that had been festering for generations. While the Jedi were making contact with Sekot, something else was happening. A small group of Yuuzhan Vong had also made it to the planet. This delegation included Nom Anor, still wearing his disguise as the prophet Yushar. There was also Harar, a priest, and Nen Yim, a master shaper who'd been questioning the Vong's rigid beliefs for a while. Nen Yim walked through Sekot's forests and saw something that broke her heart. Here was proof that the Yuuzhan Vong had once been connected to the Force, to the natural flow of life that their modern society rejected. They'd lost their way somewhere in their history, cutting themselves off from what they'd once been. She understood then that the invasion was built on a lie. The gods the Yuuzhan Vong worshipped had never commanded them to reject technology or reshape the galaxy. Those were choices their ancestors had made, and those choices had led them down a path of endless war and suffering. Nom Anor, though, wasn't interested in spiritual revelations. He saw Zonama Sekot as a threat that needed to be eliminated. If he could destroy the living planet, Shimara might forgive his failures and restore him to favor. He planted bombs across Sekot's surface, hidden devices meant to tear the planet apart from within. But Zonama Sekot's defenses weren't just physical. The planet sensed the threat and neutralized it before Nom Anor could trigger the explosives. His treachery exposed, Nom Anor did what he did best. He ran. He stole one of Sekot's organic ships and fled back toward Yuuzhan to warn Shimra that the living planet was coming. Whether he thought this warning would buy him redemption or he just wanted to cause more chaos, nobody knew. Probably both. Nen Yim stayed behind on Sekot, convinced she'd found answers the Yuuzhan Vong desperately needed. Hara remained too, working with the Jedi to understand what Sekot's arrival might mean for ending the war. Everything was falling into place for the final confrontation. Zonama Sekot prepared to jump across the galaxy to Coruscant. The Galactic Alliance was rebuilding its strength after Mon Calamari. The Yuuzhan Vong leadership was dealing with growing unrest among the lower castes and the mysterious appearance of what might be their ancestral homeworld. The seeds of peace were being planted, even though nobody on either side quite understood it yet. Zonama Sekot represented something both factions needed, but didn't know they were missing: a connection to the past. A path forward that didn't require total annihilation of the other side. When Sekot finally made its jump to Yuuzhan, everything would come to a head. The living planet arriving in orbit above the conquered capital would force both the Yuuzhan Vong and the Galactic Alliance to confront questions they'd been avoiding since the invasion began. Who were the Yuuzhan Vong really? Where had they come from? What did they want beyond conquest and reshaping worlds? And could there be any resolution to this war besides one side wiping out the other completely? Zonama Sekot was about to give everyone some answers. Whether those answers would lead to peace or just more fighting, that remained to be seen. In the closing months of 29 ABY, something appeared in the skies above Coruscant that stopped the Yuuzhan Vong cold. Zonama Sekot dropped out of hyperspace right over their capital, a living planet hovering where moons used to orbit. The Yuuzhan Vong completely lost it. Some thought their gods had come to judge them. Others believed this was Yuuzhan itself, their lost homeworld, returning after all these centuries. Religious awe mixed with panic as warriors stared up at a verdant world that shouldn't exist. Supreme Overlord Shimra made a decision that would cost him everything. He ordered every Yuuzhan Vong force across the galaxy to pull back and defend Coruscant against whatever threat Zonama Sekot represented. Ships that had been occupying distant systems abandoned their posts. Garrisons left conquered worlds to rush back to the capital. It was exactly the opening the Galactic Alliance needed. While the Vong were busy freaking out about a living planet, Alliance forces liberated system after system in the outer territories. Worlds that had been under occupation for years suddenly found themselves free as the invaders retreated. Shimra's overreaction handed the Alliance victories they wouldn't have won otherwise. But the real fight was coming at Coruscant itself. The Galactic Alliance assembled the largest fleet in galactic history. Ships from the former New Republic, the Imperial Remnant, the Hapes Consortium, and dozens of other allied powers converged on a single target. They came down the Polemian trade route in a massive offensive aimed straight at the heart of Yuuzhan Vong territory. The Second Battle of Coruscant made every previous engagement look small by comparison. Alliance and Vong fleets clashed in orbit above the occupied capital. Ships fought amidst wrecked moons and debris fields, exchanging fire in a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Han and Leia led a rescue mission during the chaos. Hundreds of Alliance prisoners were being held for ritual sacrifice, and the two heroes weren't about to let that happen. They fought their way through Vong defenses, freed the captives, and got them back to Alliance lines. Among the rescued were high-ranking officers who immediately rejoined the battle, adding to the Alliance's coordination and strength. On the surface, Luke Skywalker led a Jedi strike team through the transformed landscape of Coruscant. The city-covered world had been reshaped into jungles and organic structures. Jacen, Jaina, Mara Jade, and other Jedi fought alongside Luke as they pushed toward Shimra's citadel. The final confrontation took place in the Supreme Overlord's throne room. Luke faced Shimra Jama'an and his elite Slayer bodyguards in a duel that would end the invasion one way or another. The fight was intense, but Luke had decades of experience and the full power of the Force behind him. Luke struck down Shimra, cutting down the Yuuzhan Vong Supreme Leader and seemingly ending the war in one blow. Except Shimra hadn't been the real power behind the throne. Onimi, the Supreme Overlord's jester, who everyone thought was just entertainment, revealed himself as the true mastermind. He was Force-sensitive, something that shouldn't have been possible for a Yuuzhan Vong. He'd been manipulating Shimara's mind for years, controlling the invasion from the shadows. Onimi unleashed his mutated Force abilities on the Jedi, trying to finish what his puppet had started. But Jacen Solo stepped forward. After everything he'd been through with Vergere, after losing Anakin, after his captivity and torture, Jacen had reached a level of understanding about the Force that few ever attained. He achieved oneness, a state of complete unity with the Force where everything became clear and possible. In that moment, Jacen was more than just a Jedi Knight. He was a conduit for the Force itself. Jacen defeated Onimi, ending the schemer's twisted existence and removing the last leader of the Yuuzhan Vong invasion. The deaths of both Shimara and Onimi sent ripples through the Force that every Vong warrior could feel. Their supreme leader was gone. The mind controlling their supreme leader was gone. There was nothing left to fight for. War Master Naschoka made the call. He'd been fighting this war longer than almost anyone, and he knew when it was over. Standing aboard his flagship with Alliance forces closing in on all sides, Choka broadcast a message to every Yuuzhan Vong warrior in the galaxy. The war is ended. 3 words that changed everything. Choka ordered all forces to lay down their weapons and surrender. Some fanatical warriors chose to take their own lives rather than accept defeat, but most obeyed their War Master's final command. After 4 years of brutal fighting, after millions of lives lost, and entire worlds reshaped or destroyed, the Yuuzhan Vong War was over. The invaders who'd conquered half the galaxy had been beaten at the very center of their power. On Coruscant's transformed surface, Alliance soldiers and liberated citizens celebrated together. The nightmare was finally done. People who'd been enslaved under Vong occupation were free. Worlds that had been cut off from each other for years could reconnect. Families separated by war could start looking for each other. The victory came at a cost that would take generations to calculate. Entire species were gone. Planets were so badly damaged they might never fully recover. The death toll was beyond anything the galaxy had experienced before. But it was over. The Yuuzhan Vong had been defeated. Zonama Sekot, the living planet that shared their origins, had helped broker the peace in ways nobody quite understood yet. The Galactic Alliance had proven that unity and cooperation could overcome even the most devastating threat. Standing in the ruins of what used to be Coruscant's urban landscape, now covered in alien jungles and organic structures, the survivors faced a massive task. Rebuilding wouldn't just mean fixing buildings or restoring infrastructure. It meant healing wounds that went deeper than anyone wanted to admit. But at least they had the chance. The Yuuzhan Vong War was over, and the galaxy could finally start putting itself back together.